Board of Equalization hearings. There are 5 cases on the agenda today. We do have a quorum, with the exception of right now we don't have Mr. Yates. So the first case on the agenda is RPC 140490307. Just to note that Mr. Lawson has a conflict and will not be voting on this case. So we have 4 board members that will vote, which is the quorum. So I don't believe Mr. Branham is here because he asked to withdraw. So I'm going to let Ms. Roskin explain what the situation is. Ms. Roskin, turn your microphone on, please.
That's a first. Okay. So basically, he was just checking to make sure that this evaluation was not being double counted on a couple of other RPCs. And so I confirmed that it's not being, the parking garage income and expenses are not being considered in the office partner, which is RPC 14049-014, and the hotel partner, which is RPC 14049-029. So we've made sure that the garage revenue and expenses are all being redirected to this particular parcel, this subject, which is 14-049-307, and that the agent is satisfied.
Okay, and so it stands at the $8,792,800.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that being the case, I will vote to allow the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Hoffman is a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Ken says aye.
This is Jose. I can't turn my camera on, but I vote aye.
Okay. And opposed? No? Okay, so that would be 4-0. It's unanimous. That is, the withdrawal is allowed. Thank you, Ms. Roskin.
Board members.
Okay, now Mr. Wright, you can turn your camera on, and Mr. Peralta. Okay, moving to the second case on the agenda. That is Economic Unit 35003020. The property at 1321 South Elm Street. And the appellant has sent additional information to all of the people, to all the board members yesterday afternoon. So make sure that you have that in front of you. And so, Mr. Wright, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Sure, thank you. Well, the subject property is currently under construction. It's a part of Amazon's HQ2 plan in Arlington County, Virginia, and basically what our argument today is on equity of the land valuation. The improvement valuation is just an apportionment based on the assessor's cost approach for the totality of the improvements, which we're not there's no complaint there. So basically we've looked at a number of comparable assessments for land value, compared it to our land assessment, and therefore have come to a valuation different than in seeking correction or based on equity. Do you have our analysis in front of you? I mean, our new packet in front of you? Or can we share that on the screen or no? Okay. So if you're looking at page 2, you can see there's a map of what the planned development should look like. This is Metropolitan Park. There's a plan for about 2 million square feet of space there. Page 3 is how the property looked once all of the demolition was completed. And then page 4 is a picture of the property under development as of August 2021. Page 5 of 31 is a rendering of what we believe, we expect the property to look like once complete, and that is expected to be completed in 2023. Page 6 is our summary of our position. As I mentioned, there are 2 parcels that make up 6.24 acres of land, which is the basis of our appeal. Currently, the value is close to $140 million in land valuation, with a total of about $300 million of total value, including the partial assessment of the improvements. But our focus is on the land. And considering the uniformity and equity of similar properties in the area, we believe that the land valuation should be closer to 55 million, which, in keeping the improvement value the same at 156 million, we're requesting a total value of 211, close to $211 million. Now, page 7 is our uniformity analysis, where we looked at more than 20 office locations in the Arlington County area. And as you can see, there's multiple properties that for land valuation ranges from $63 to $326 a square foot of land. Where the median the average was about $202 a square foot, and the median was $203 per square foot of land. And that's basically what we applied that median value to our land area for the property, which brings us to for 842 for parcel ending in 842, 25,718,000. For parcel ending in 843, that's 29,676,000, for a total of the 55,395,000 in total land value. Again, that's $203 a square foot. The assessor currently has a value at $514 a square foot. Again, we kept the improvement value the same to bring us to a total for the economic unit, total value of $211,669,000. Now, I'm assuming that the assessor's land valuation came in from some of the set purchase prices that occurred. However, I would like to note that these purchases were off market through some of the landlords that we deal with in the area, such as JBS, and these weren't on market necessarily. All of these weren't on market transaction. This was an assemblage, and for the purposes of building this a headquarters in this targeted area. So I wouldn't consider these purchase prices as market transactions to develop a value. And I believe it is that the property's land valuation should be within equity of other properties in the area. And as you can see, we're currently at the land valuation of the subject property is at $515 per square foot of land, while at the height of some of these properties, it's at $326, but the median and average is close to $203 a square foot. The following page, on page 8, basically shows where these assessment comps are in comparison to the subject property. As you can note, that where the subject property is not directly next to the metro line, similar to where Crystal City is or Pentagon City is. There's some walking that you would have to do when we develop these spaces there. And so it's not a totally developed area as compared to where these comparable properties are. And then after that, we've included all the assessment information for each of those properties, just for the record. But overall, as I mentioned, this is a property that's under construction, and we're just trying to work with the county on a going forward basis, and ensuring that as the development is complete and going forward, that we have a correct valuation on the property, and that the property is in equity of similar surrounding properties. And so again, our requested value is $211 million based on the land valuation, correcting it within equity from $515 a square foot to $203 per square foot.
Okay, are you concluded?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, thank you. And for the county, Mr. Peralta.
Yes, good morning, board. For this property, it was inspected in December of 21 by Irving Bailey. Construction at that point was at 30% based on the inspection, and it included the excavation, the concrete, the floors of rough framing, and exterior covering, and windows on the first and second floors. Basically, for the 2022 assessment, we costed out this property based on that 30%, and the values of the land and improvement were allocated accordingly. If there is an issue with the land, which there is not, the total value would stay the same, and it would just revert to that improvement value. But including the square foot aspect of the property, it is equitable among other office properties, whereas it's $65 per GFA. And for this property, as you see on my page 2 of 76, there's a paragraph there that kind of describes exactly what the exact GFA is for this property. I believe phase 6 office GFA is 898,687, and retail GFA is 27,878. Phase 7 and 8 of the office is 1,183,879 square feet, and retail GFA is 41,667 square feet for a total GFA of 2,152,111, and parking space is about 1,933. So if you factor that total GFA times the $65 square foot, $65, you'll come up with how we valued the land. Land in Arlington is not based on per square foot. It's again based on the density on the GFA of $65 square foot. With that, unless Chris has anything else to add, I'm done with my presentation.
Yeah, just wanted
And
to
open for
reiterate.
questions.
I appreciate Rob. Just wanted to reiterate. I think it's just the difference of how it's being looked at. Mr. Wright is essentially, I believe, valiant based off the lot size, which is how he gets that $515 a square foot. As the board, I hope, is familiar, we value based off of the GFA that was approved. You can actually see a better breakdown of that on page 5 of 76, where they show the approved office of $2,082,566, again at $65 a square foot, and 69,545 square feet of retail, again at $65 a square foot. This is equitable with all other office properties that are metro accessible, retail, again, that are metro accessible. So the $65 is 100% equitable with all other property types that are similar to this one. Given that that we do have that equitable land rate, we do believe that the land is, again, valued correctly and in equity with other similar property types. So we do believe that that value should be confirmed at $296,161,800. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
I guess for Mr. Peralta, we usually, when it's kind of mid-construction, the appellant will submit like a end of year construction draw request or some sort of breakdown from the contractor showing what was spent, just to kind of validate the cost approach. Did you get anything, or was there any discussion about what the construction costs through December 31st were?
I did not receive anything. No.
Okay. And then Mr. Wright, is there any reason why you didn't submit anything that would kind of validate the cost, or is that just the idea that you're not appealing it because it's probably, too low?
Well, no, our issue wasn't cost of the building at this point. It's basically based on the land valuation. So that's why we didn't provide it. But at the same time, well, I would be answering another question.
Okay, yeah, and I just one follow up.
ahead.
I just
And it
I've
wasn't
seen
a
a couple of
question from me at the same time.
yeah. I mean, we've got a couple of different square footage, but it's roughly 2.1 million square feet of office building that's being put on this land. You're kind of looking at this through the square footage of land, but did you do any analysis on the building square footage that could actually be built on that land?
No, I simply based it on the equity of what land values are on other properties compared to the subject property. And even if you're considering it based off the GFA at the time that as of the date of valuation, there wasn't 2 million square foot of land on the property for them to establish the $65 per square foot. And the reason why it's important to note that is that, you know, as we are developing, and that's why I don't have any square footage on my in my analysis, because as we're developing these properties, you got to understand that COVID did occur. And, you know, one thing that we also know is that the office market in that region, there's a large, and probably in most, you know, metro areas, you know, we have a lot of obsolescence, you know, due to vacancy. And so there are changes and there, well, I'm not necessarily able to speak. There may be some potential changes in plans totally for this project. So, you know, we're looking at projected square footage versus what's actually there so far. And so that's one thing that I would be careful, you know, about establishing value on what's planned to be developed at the property, because plans do change,
Okay.
especially in the office market.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, this is for the county. What's a FAR? I'm sorry. I mean, what? Yeah, what's the FAR of this? It's 17, something like that. 17 FAR. I guess let me ask my question differently. Is any of the density on these two parcels yanked from open space?
What do you mean by yank from open space?
Um,
Is it used to develop some of the?
Well, there could be like a park dedicated to the county, but some of the density from that park could have been placed into the building that happens to be on this site. And I guess what I'm asking is, the county's not double assessing property, are they? Because you have a 17 FAR if you just look at this property, and it's CO 2.5, which won't yield that much density. So the density has to be coming from elsewhere within Metropolitan Place. And so what I'm asking is, some of that density that's in these two buildings coming from other parcels. I suspect it is.
Yeah, and so to be honest, I don't believe that it is, but we can do further research. As I understand it, this project being approved was just chock full of quid pro quos as far as density increases and what they had to do to get this approved. So I know that there was a lot of contributions to AHF density as far as public parks, but I don't believe so, to be completely honest. I believe this was all done throughout the conglomeration of the various parcels that were present at Met Park.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Matzkin, I can't see you, so do you have any questions?
Thank you. You cannot see me. I have a question for the department, and it's really just a reality check. My understanding is that in commercial properties like this, that you have the total property, in this case an economic unit, assessed based on age and location, metro accessibility, and all this kind of good stuff. And you come up with a total figure, and then you, again, for this kind of property, or you assign the land at just $65. for a square foot, and what's left is the improvement. And so if that's correct, then the differences in land values that the appellant showed us in their follow-up piece is really a function of other similar buildings having lesser improvement value because the land value stayed the same. So it appears that the land value as a percentage or a portion of the total amount it changes from time to time, but in fact it's really the same if and only if you assess land separately, which you do not. I hope that wasn't too tortured.
No, Ken,
But I mean,
the biggest difference is when you're valuing a site plan versus a cost approach versus income. With the cost approach, you really do have two separate portions. You have the land, which again is very straightforward. It's the approved density, not the lot size, but the approved density times $65 a square foot. And then for the improvement, you have the replacement cost new less depreciation. So in this case, we do a Marshall & Swift of 2 22-story buildings, LEED certified, elevators, plumbing, etc. We come up with a total value. And then, as Rob alluded to, come last December, Irving went out and estimated the total completion at about 30%. So we take the total of the replacement cost new less depreciation, scale that back to 30%, and that is the improvement. In a normal situation, you are correct. If we have income approach where you have a total value, once you have land that's established, the rest is allocated towards the improvement. But in this scenario, it is going to be unique in that we're looking at an improvement value based off the cost approach and the land, which is going to be based off of the density that was approved by the county board.
And when it gets to be 100%, the improvement is 100% completed, then that apparent cost of land per square foot, per square yard will lower because the improvement value will increase. Right?
The land will stay the same. So again, the only time there will be an allocation change is once it switches to the improvement, but in which case the land will still be the same. The difference will be is whatever's left of the total amount between the total value and the land, which again is fixed at $65 a square foot times that approved density, is going to be the improvement.
That's the key.
Yeah, and we would revert to income approach at that time.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes. Sorry. The value of the land is equitably assessed with other office properties in the county at $65 a square foot. We ask that the board confirm the case based on the equity alone, and that number, I believe, sorry. The land for the property is at $139,887,200, but the proposed total is $296,161,800. Thank you.
And may I add something?
Okay, you can take a minute now, sir, and make your concluding comments.
Sure. If we go back to page 7 of 31, the page labeled 7 of 31, which is our uniformity analysis. As we noted, this property is currently under construction and the assessors only established about 30% of value on each of the improvement value. And so, which brings the building total values to 143 million and 153 million, which is in line with basically already completed value, but this is at 30%. This is at 30% of its value. It's already well above or just at the value of some of these completed buildings. Now, I do understand that this property will be a new facility, and there should be some disparity in value once it's complete. But to see that the disparity already that exists is that you'll have a property that's 128,000 square feet, similar to smaller than many of these properties here listed, and at 30% of its construction value, it's already equaling or above many of the assessment values of these properties at 30% of its construction. So I would like the board to consider that and understanding when you make the decision is that what the property is assessed at in totality at 30% of its valuation.
Okay, okay, thank you both. Okay, now it's just among the board members. What's everybody think on this? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start off. This area of the county, Metropolitan Park, has significant public parks. And the article that was included in our package is talking about, there's a lot of planning commission discussion about, will the park be welcoming? Will it be active, public access easements, so forth and so on. And I've been involved in, before I went on this board, I was involved in appeals for other large site plans where you have a whole area development, Pentagon City and some others. And the county typically does do this properly, and you have a total overall parcel. And then you in that parcel, you have areas that are open, areas that are public, and then you concentrate your building into building parcels. And this has a 17 FAR, which is really high. and I guess they did a good job getting that approved. But when you look at the FAR on a FAR square foot basis, it's $65, which I think is right in the market. And so, given what I've heard, and we haven't looked at the public open space or the public easements, but as far as these two parcels with a $65 FAR value put on the land, which has yielded a 17 FAR, I think it's appropriately assessed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I was gonna answer it earlier, but I don't think I'm supposed to talk when they're doing the back and forth. But Barnes, I think it's an 8 FAR based on just these two land parcels. So if you take a the 2.1 million square feet and the land area is 271,000, so it comes out to just about an 8 FAR. And the question is, at an 8, 65 a square foot that the county thinks is reasonable, and the appellant, if you go with their number of $203 per square foot of land, that equates to about $25 an FAR foot, which is very low. And so then kind of the last gut check I have here is that page 7 of the packet, which the appellant was pointing to, the uniformity analysis. So take a couple of these data points, like Crystal Park 3, the first one on the list. If you normalize it to an 8 FAR, they're actually higher on the land per square foot of land price. So like the first one on the list is a 5 FAR. So if you made it an 8 and you put the building square footage to what you could yield at an 8 FAR, it comes out to $521 a square foot of land. So I think the county's pretty close there. In fact, they're probably a little bit conservative on the value of the subject property.
I had 126,000 square feet as the site area.
That you're looking at one parcel. There's two. You got to add them together. You get 271, 671.
So it is less than the 17.
It's an 8 FAR. Yeah.
Okay, that's still pretty high. Seeing 2.5.
It's on page 6 of the appellant's latest piece.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm good with what the county has. If anything, they're a little bit low, because I think the progress, Irving probably was conservative on estimating progress. I go out there right now and I say, it's 8 months later, but the total assessment's $138 a square foot.
Right.
They put that just into the earthwork. Right.
Yeah, any other comments? All right, would somebody like to make a motion then?
I'll make one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mr.
motion
Hoffman?
to confirm the county's assessment of 296, 161, 800.
A second.
Okay, a motion and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Ken says aye.
Okay. That will be unanimous. It's 6-0. The county's confirmed at 296,161,800. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I believe I saw Ms. Borman. I don't know, is Mr. Harmon on?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so on the next case, let me just pull this up. The next case, RPC 14017-016 at 4401 Fairfax Drive. Just for the board members, I believe Ms. Borman and Mr. Harmon know this. Mr. Peralta noticed on the grid page that the numbers outside of the test column were incorrect. So I didn't want Mr. Harmon or Ms. Borman to waste time comparing that. They've already are aware of that. So if any of the board members are looking at that, the numbers in the column are calculated correctly. It's just that the per square foot items to the right of that column are incorrect. So with that being said, Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Good morning. This is the Arlington Square office building. It's at the intersection of Glebe Road and Fairfax. It was built in 1988 and has a net leasable area of 140,000 square feet. The issues on appeal are the vacant office rental rate, the rent loss associated with reaching stabilized occupancy, and the tenant improvement allowance. The DREA's test is on page 4 of the appeal, and the appellant's pro forma is on page 40. If you direct your attention to the rent roll on page 6 of the appeal, you'll see that the 3 most recent office leases at the property are for CMTA, the American Society of Pension Professionals, and DeCedar Group. These 3 leases have a weighted net effective rent of $33.27 per square foot, which supports our claim value of $34 per square foot on the vacant office space. Next, on the DREA test on page 4 of the appeal, we see that operating expenses are assessed at $8.16 per square foot. This rate ignores the fact that the property has been over 40% vacant over the past 3 years. If we're going to stabilize income based on stabilized occupancy at 75% occupied, we must also stabilize the expenses at 75% occupied. In addition to this property having excess vacancy above that 25% vacancy allowance, work from home policies have limited the actual physical occupancy by current tenants, which has depressed the operating expenses reported for both 2020 and 2021. If we consider the growth in only variable expenses alone, that will be incurred upon stabilized occupancy, the operating expense rate is more accurate at $10 per square foot. You look at janitorial expenses in 2021, they were $1.74 per occupied square foot. If we apply this rate to the excess vacancy to stabilize the operating expenses, this adds $46,600 or 33 cents per square foot to the operating expenses. Next, utilities in 2021 were $194,500 or $2.48 per leased square foot. Stabilizing this expense by the excess vacancy adds another $66,600 or 47 cents per square foot to the operating expenses. Finally, the management fee in 2021 was $1.22 per occupied square foot. This adds another $32,700 or 23 cents per square foot to the operating expenses. In addition to the increase in variable costs that we can calculate based on the occupied space in 2021, if you take a look at page 40 of the appeal, you'll see that neighboring properties are assessed at or around $10 per square foot. $10 per square foot in operating expenses should be applied to this property to be equalized with its peer properties in the same neighborhood. This property also suffers from inadequate lease-up deductions. The office market in Ballston and Arlington as a county has been significantly affected by work-from-home policies. The assessment only uses 1 year of lost rent in its lease-up. This simply is not a realistic timeframe in the current market due to the leasing velocity actually experienced. We had discussions about the lease-up period on several cases before the board in 2021. It was stated often that one-year lease-up is not reflective of the market as it stood then. The market has not improved as of the date of value. In fact, the office absorption has slowed over the course of 2021 compared to 2020. Page 30 of the Wilkes Artist Board Book shows the office absorption as of the third quarter of 2021, according to Arlington Economic Development. Year-to-date absorption at this point for Arlington was negative 697,000 square feet. This is 47,000 fewer square feet leased than the year prior. This same report shows that third quarter 2021 vacancy for Ballston was 25% versus 22% 1 year prior. Clearly, absorption and vacancy are both trending in the wrong direction, and this doesn't even consider space available for sublease. In addition, physical occupancy, again, the amount of employees actually going into the office, is still nowhere near pre-pandemic levels. As I previously stated, page 35 of the board book shows Castle Access keycard swipes for the DC metro area. This was at 36% physical occupancy in December of 2021. Arlington County is uniquely situated to suffer the detriments of work from home policies due to the professional, white-collar workforce that would have occupied offices in the county. Making matters worse for the office market, Arlington County has a large federal workforce. You can see on page 15 of the board book that as of April 2021, the federal government leased some 6.3 million square feet of office space in the county. The federal government has widely adopted work from home policies, as you can see in articles beginning on page 18 and 22 of the board book. Clearly, given the lack of demand for office space and the ongoing adoption of work from home policies, 1 year lease up is not adequate to reach stabilized occupancy at this property. Again, the leasing activity in the county is widely known, and absorption decreased over the course of 2021 compared to the year prior, yet the assessment still uses 1 year lease up period. Next, the assessment again applies a $70 per square foot tenant improvement allowance. This rate is not appropriate given the condition of the vacant space at the property. Mr. Peralta and I toured this property in October of last year, where we saw that the 4th and 5th floors, comprising over 41,000 square feet, were in shell condition. An additional unoccupied half of another floor was also in shell condition. Given the amount of vacant space in shell condition at the property, $100 per square foot in tenant improvements needs to be deducted to adequately capture the state of the property. To summarize, the assessment overstates the market rent that can be anticipated based on the most recent leasing activity at the property. The assessment understates the operating expenses that will be incurred at stabilized occupancy, and also does not apply a uniform operating expense rate to this property's peers in the neighborhood. Finally, the assessment understates both the time to reach stabilized occupancy and the resulting tenant improvements required to reach stabilization. As such, taxpayer respectfully requests the assessment be reduced as outlined in the appeal. Thank you. And Eileen, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, Jordan, unless the board has any questions. Thank you.
Okay, we will move to Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, good morning. For this property, if you look at the history of this property, you see that before COVID 2018, they had a gross potential income that was less than what they're reporting in 2020 and 2021. Now, keep in mind, they're not reporting any vacancy income in these INEs, so our projections are a little bit more in our test column and also in the appellant's pro forma. So if you look at the gross potential of this property, the county has at 5.4 million, and this is based again on including that vacancy square feet that isn't accounted for and the income attributable to that. If you see between columns E and F, the county kind of imputed a side note there to kind of illustrate if we're using the appellant's pro forma numbers for the vacant square footage, the gross potential income plus the actual income that was reported in 2021, column E, would be a GPI of 5.598682, as compared to column F and column G, 5.4 and 5.3. The county does recognize that this property has vacancy in about 57,425 square feet, and the appellant agrees with that square footage. I believe the 2021 INE included storage as vacant. Looking at that vacant square footage over the years, you see that this property has improved upon its vacancy. In 2018, there's 108,436 square feet vacant, and currently we're at 57,425. Moving down towards the vacancy, again, we included 25% vacancy for this property because it fell within that frame as far as the square footage as of the date of valuation. I believe we're at 42% vacant. We allocated excess vacancy below the line, given the parameters that we set in our guidelines at $70 a square foot for income producing properties lower than $45 a square foot. Now, looking at the expenses of this property, you see that it's pretty level throughout. Even in 2018, they were at a higher expense rate with a higher vacancy square footage at 108,436, as I noted earlier. Currently, they're at $8 a square foot. $1,108,707 for 2021. The county's test included $1,145,707, so slightly higher than what they reported in 2021, giving somewhat credence to what the appellant has mentioned that cost has increased, but even before COVID, they're pretty level with the expenses at $8 in 2018. $7 in 2019, $7 in 2020, and $8 again in 2021. So with that, the county concluded that the original assessment was supported, given that the change in value in our test was higher than what we originally had. Speaking towards the office rental rates, if you take a look at the county's rent roll, and that's on page 6 of 63, you'll see that the rents are there, and they include rents that range from $39.50 to $44.21, supplied by the rent roll in the 2021 assessment, 2021 INE. So with that, we ask that the board confirm this case at $38,297,600. Chris, did you have anything to add?
Just briefly, wanted to touch on something that was spoken about earlier in regards to a 2-year below the line adjustment. Again, I think we've talked about this before in the sense that we're an annual assessment. We look at these properties annually every year. Every year is looked at independently. So to give a 2-year adjustment on an annual assessment just seems inappropriate. We understand the need for a adjustment, but again, given that we're an annual, not triannual, biannual, we're an annual assessment. So I believe that it should be looked at each year individually. We don't know what next year will bring, so making an adjustment for that year doesn't make any sense. And again, just to harp on what Rob talked about, this property essentially had a similar, in fact, lower operating expenses in 2018 when there were almost twice as much vacancy. So we believe that the operating expenses projected by the appellant is just too aggressive, especially given the last 4 years that are illustrated on the summary sheet. That being said, we do believe the test confirms that the January 1 assessment should be confirmed at $38,297,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? Mr. Lawson.
Yes, I just have a really quick one for the applicant. let's see, let me go to your, page 40. There, you're talking about parking income, and it says the assessed parking, the assumed parking income is in excess of actual parking income. And then you have other income, and then it says the assumed other income is in excess of the actual parking income. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me, is it something else?
I think it's just a typo, Mr. Lawson.
What?
If I think
Is
it's
it
just
like-
a typo. Yeah, the parking income is in excess, as is the other income on the assessment. So on the other income in the assessment, 23,900 is assumed, and the actual is 940.
Okay,
And
but it's not parking, it has anything to do with parking.
no,
And
but the
that-
parking income also has the same situation where in the assessment, they assumed the county assumed 258, 300, and the actual was 206,042.
And it's important to point out too, Mr. Lawson, that on the DREA test column, they did adjust those down to those actual 2021 figures for both pass-through, parking, and other income. So that we pointed that out from the initial assessment, and then the adjustment was made on the DREA test column.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Matskin, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
For the appellant, I didn't understand it seemed to me double counting. You have a vacant building, relatively vacant building because of COVID. But this is all about operating expenses. That you were normalizing it to a 75% occupancy rate, and therefore the dollars per square foot based on expenses should go up. It seemed to me it was double counting. Perhaps you could go over that again, how you go from $8 or $8.50 a square foot up to almost $10 a square foot.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So
One last thing, excuse me. In the prior years before COVID, it was at $7, and it was occupied, I understand, by a factor of more than 75%. But now you're normalizing at 75.
Okay, I'd like to address the first part, the second part of your question first. So the DREA test page does not show occupancy or vacancy at this property. So if you go to page 40 of the appeal, our pro forma does show year-end vacancy, and year-end vacancy at the end of 2019 was 45.5%, 2020, 42.4% vacant, 2021, 43.6% vacant. So this property has not had stabilized vacancy at 75% occupancy for some time. So the contention is in 2021, as an example, actual operating expenses with almost 44% vacant were $7.90 per square foot. On the income side of the assessment, we gross it up to 75% occupied. We need to do that same methodology to the operating expenses. If we're going to assume 75% of the property is occupied, then we have to also assume that 75% of the property is generating operating expenses. They're using lights, restrooms are being used, trash is being collected. So what the county has done is they've taken the 2021 actual expenses of $77.90 per square foot. Again, that's when it was only 67% occupied or 57% occupied, I'm sorry. And they've grown that by 3.3%, which doesn't even take into account the record inflation that we've had, let alone the additional 20% occupancy that we've assumed for the income side. So if we grow that, we have to account for that additional 20% stabilized occupancy. And that's where we get the $10. And that's also in line with, again, neighboring properties in this submarket. You can see addresses of neighboring properties and what they were assessed at for operating expenses on page 40 of the appeal.
What? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, everything went just totally blank. I'm far away. I'm good with that answer. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, just again, looking at this property, if this property were not to lease up the 57,425 square feet of office space, it would still yield similar results as far as expenses are concerned for this property. If the board were to credit this property's expenses not incurred, I think that it would be improper to do so. I guess looking at the overall rental income for this property, you see that in column E, there's a figure there for the actual income that is achieved on this property for the office space lease of $3,355,833. The counties in their test, and as well as the pro forma, the appellant, already discount that actual income received of about a difference of $346,635. So we're accounting for some of the income adjustment there in our test as well. So we believe that just to start off, when we're developing the value for this property, we are giving a discount, so to speak, and adjusting those figures based on the rents that are actually in place. This column test F is an accurate depiction of what this property would yield had it been fully occupied. And given so, we do allow for the adjustments below the line, and the value in this test actually showed an increase. So we asked the board to confirm the original assessment at $38,297,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to address operating expenses first. The county has made the contention that we don't credit operating expenses not incurred. However, we have credited income not earned on the assessment. So if we're going to credit income not earned, we also need to credit operating expenses related to that earning that income that were not spent. So just growing the 2021 actual operating expenses when this property was 57% vacant, just growing that figure by 3.3% does not account for a fully stabilized property. Also, page 42 of the appeal shows months on market for Arlington County. You can see this is well above 2 years. Again, we had these discussions last year at the board, and 1 year lease up is just not reflective of leasing velocity in the county. Absorption went down in 2021 compared to 2020. Again, this doesn't even consider space available for sublease. This is just new office space leased. The TIs need to be $100. This is in shell condition. It needs to be fully built out as new. It's not, we toured the property in October of last year and saw that it was in shell condition. As such, TI should be $100 per square foot. So just to summarize, the $10 per square foot operating expenses are supported by both grossing up the actual operating expenses to a stabilized occupancy level. Operating expenses at $10 per square foot are also supported by equalizing this property with neighboring properties. 2 years
And
lease up is
I
more.
need you to wrap up because you're,
Okay, thank you.
you're over your minute. Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. Where is everybody on this? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, I think it needs to come down. It's just a matter of how it gets calculated out. I got a couple ideas, but I'll hear, what everybody else has to say. But the, $9 to $10 in operating expenses in the RB corridor is totally what we're seeing. So to say that it's going to be the same price that it was in 2018, look at the cost of anything.
Right.
Where it's gone. So, I'm looking ahead to the next case, and it's like the county put in an assessment at $10 a square foot for another 200,000 square foot office building that they're going to be arguing in a few minutes. So, 10 seems reasonable to me. $9 to $10 a square foot seems reasonable.
Yeah, I agree. Are other folks on board with that? Do we want to hear where he's going? Mr. Yates? turn your microphone on, please?
Yes, I do. But I wanted to ask Greg, as far as the TIs, I do think they're low too. I want to see what you thought. You're doing it.
Yeah, I agree with that. But
This is Ken. Let me interject on that. What that means is at $100, that's 2.5 years of rent. I mean, this is 40 something, dollars a square foot, or it's actually a little less. So it's at least 2.5 years of rent to accommodate somebody. Now, if it's a 20-year lease, sure, no problem. But it's not going to be 20, and it's probably in this office environment not going to be 10. I think the landlord do well if they got 5. So all of a sudden, 50% of their income goes to TI, which, by the way, will service the, hopefully the successor of this tenant. So I'm not. I understand the concept. It's shell. There are no walls. There's no sink. There, and amenities. But that just doesn't make rational sense. From my point of view, representing a tenant, a landlord's going to laugh at me. You want half the income to be spent to accommodate. So, the effective income is whatever, $19 a square foot in Boston. That's just not going to work. So I don't support that. I certainly support the operating expenses going up for a variety of reasons.
okay, let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Hoffman of where he's
right.
the numbers.
If you take column F and you plug in the 998 operating expenses and just calculate it through, you get 35,703,700.
Wait a minute, you went a little too fast, sir. One more time.
Take column F,
Mhm.
the county's test, and you plug in the 1.4,620,000 operating expenses and keep everything else the same. Then I got 35,703,700.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, I can live with that.
Hey.
Mr. Yates?
I still think the TIs is an issue. I understand, but I think, Ken, what you're doing is you're projecting what they're going to lease it for and how long. That's a decision they're going to make as they go. The cost of the renovation or the putting the tenant in there is going to be the same. It's higher than it used to be by far. So they got to make the business decision. Do we rent it for 5 years, lease it for 5 years, or do we hold out for 15 or something? But the cost is the cost. I think that is.
No, it's not. I'm sorry, Mark.
Okay, well, let me just interrupt here. So let's find out from the other, because we know where you guys are on that. Mr. Penaranda and Mr. Lawson, are you okay with Mr. Hoffman's number, or do you need something lower? Because if there's not enough votes, there's no reason to even discuss this. Mr. Penaranda?
No, I'm okay with it. I originally was thinking like the same as Mr. Yates as far as the TIs, but if we're going to increase the expenses, I'm okay with that instead of doing the TIs.
Okay, and Mr. Lawson?
I'm the same. I think on the on tenant build out, if it's a mom and pop tenant, yeah, I think the landlord's going to force some of that cost back on them. But when you're talking about 100,000 square feet in a large office building, I think the tenants are probably going to force that back to the landlord. So given that I do think the build out is more than 70, but how that would be allocated between the parties, I don't know. So I'll go with Greg's suggestion.
Okay. All right, Mr. Hoffman, I'm ready for a motion.
Again,
Yeah.
Before you do the motion, I'm sorry, can you give me the number that you came up with?
35,703,700.
So what was the amount of the expenses? Because I come up with a different number.
That's what I figured you'd be checking my math, and you usually get a better number here. I used 1,400,620 as the expenses.
Okay, the expenses that I come up with is 1,350,240 at $10 exactly. I'm using the same square footage that is on column F. If you divide the expenses time, by 850, you come up with 135,024 square feet. If you multiply that by 10, then the expenses come up to 1,350,240.
Okay. And what was the final number?
The final number after the deductions below the line would be 36,413,700.
Well, Greg, this is Ken. Greg, didn't you go and adjust column D? I did.
No, I was working off a column F.
Column F.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Jose, if you want to motion that one, the logic is the same as what I had. I actually trust your calculations a little bit better because I do mine quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just working out that from the same numbers that are on column F using the same square footage.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda.
Okay, then I'll move to reduce the assessment to 36,413,700 based on increasing the expenses to $10 per square foot.
And I'll second.
Okay, a motion is second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Ken says aye.
Okay, so that is unanimous. It's reduced to 36,413,700.
Mr. Penaranda, may I ask a question? Just
Well,
what
it-
square footage did you use?
Whatever is on column F, it would be 135,024 square feet.
My column F shows 140,000 square feet, 14413, which is in the board's package.
Well, I'm just using what's on column F right now.
Yeah, I don't think you have the correct column F.
Well, I'm looking
Yeah.
at page 3.
I got the 144.13 on my page. Oh, page
I got
4.
the 144,13 also.
Well, that includes the storage and all that stuff. I mean,
Okay.
Oh, you took the storage. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not doing janitorial on the storage area every
Right.
night.
All right.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
no problem.
Okay, moving along to the next case on the agenda is RPC 14016-018 at 4501 Fairfax Drive. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. 4501 North Fairfax. This property is directly adjacent to the property we just discussed, even closer to the intersection of Glebe and Fairfax Drive. It was built in 2001, has a net leasable area of 197,000 square feet. The issue on appeals are the operating expenses and the lease-up cost. Now, if you'd be so kind as to direct your attention to page 4 of the appeal, you'll see the DREA's test page. Here, you'll see that operating expenses were initially assessed for 2022 at $10 per square foot. Then on the test column dropped to only $9 per square foot. Again, this test page, what it does not show is the vacancy rate. And same argument as the prior case, since we are assuming a 75% stabilized occupancy for income, so too must we consider 75% stabilized occupancy for expenses. This is important because the historical operating expenses shown for years 2018 to 2021 are not reflective of a building operating at a stabilized occupancy. The only year shown for which occupancy was close to stabilized was 2018, when operating expenses were $9.26 per square foot. But this number is artificially deflated because 51,000 square feet that were leased were physically vacated in July of 2018. So that's 26% of the NLA that was not occupied for roughly half the year. Growing the 2018 rate, again, it was low due to low physical occupancy. But if we grow that rate at a nominal inflation rate and apply the result to the 2022 assessment, it's easily at $10 per square foot. Additionally, 2020 and 2021 physical occupancy were depressed just the same as 2018 and 2019. It's been well below stabilized because of that tenant who left. They still leased 51,000 square feet through 2021, but they had physically vacated their units in July of 2018. Again, that represents 26% of the NLA at the property shown as occupied, but was physically vacant for about half of 2019, all of 2020, and 2021. Secondly, physical occupancy has been low across the office sector. We discussed this previously with the Castle Card office swipes. DC metro area was at 36% physical occupancy as of the end of the year 2021. We've provided the data in the Arlington County Board Book supporting that low physical occupancy. With the 2021 operating expenses that we do have available for this property, we can estimate expenses at a stabilized occupancy by extrapolating how much the variable expenses alone will increase based on the 2021 occupancy and expense levels. Since one of the tenants had vacated 51,000 square feet, the result was only 71,000 square feet that were occupied in 2021. The janitorial expenses per occupied square foot was $2.32 in 2021. This adds $178,300 when we add it to the excess vacancy. Utility expenses for occupied square foot was $3.68. This grows total operating expenses by $283,000 when we gross it up to the stabilized occupancy, as we have done with the income. The management fee, another $2.14 per occupied square foot, which works out to $165,000 in additional operating expenses when applying that rate to the excess vacancy. Just stabilizing for a few of these variable costs alone gets us above the $10 per square foot in operating expenses. This rate is also equitable with how neighboring properties are assessed. Next, on the DREA test, you'll see that the assessment significantly understates, again, the cost associated with reaching stabilized occupancy. The assessment uses 1 year of lost rent, again, in its lease up. For all the reasons stated in the prior case, leasing velocity decreased in 2021 from 2020, was at negative 697,000 square feet absorption through 3 quarters. Work from home, depressing office demand, Arlington suffering from a outsized leases from the federal government, which has adopted work from home policies. 2 years of lease up costs are more reflective of the current market. Clearly, given the lack of demand for office space and the ongoing adoption of work from home policies, 1 year lease up is not adequate to reach a stabilized occupancy at this property, which had over 126,000 square feet of vacant space as of the date of value. Next, the assessment applies a tenant improvement allowance of only $70 per square foot. This, again, not adequate given the condition of the vacant space at the property. At a minimum, tenant improvements on this property should be applied at $110 per square foot. The property has 77,000 square feet in excess vacancy. 2 of the formerly occupied spaces, which total over 73,000 square feet, they're still comprised of the former tenant's obsolete build-out, and they're in the process of being demolished to shell and then white boxed. Additionally, the former space of another tenant at over 15,000 square feet is still built out for that former tenant and will likely also need to be demolished and rebuilt as well. Combined, these 3 spaces make up 88,700 square feet of area that needs to be demoed and white boxed. So to summarize, if we are to stabilize income, again, we have to stabilize these operating expenses. The property has not had stabilized occupancy since the first half of 2018, at which point the actual expenses support an operating expense rate of at least $10 per square foot. Accounting for the pro rata increase in variable expenses results in operating expenses well above $10 per square foot. And finally, the lease-up cost, given the current leasing environment in Ballston and the condition of the vacant space, should be increased by allowing for 2 years of lost rent and $110 per square foot in tenant improvements. As such, the taxpayer respectfully requests that the assessment be reduced as outlined in the appeal. Thank you. And Eileen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do. I'm just going to explain the difference between the 110 on this case and the 100 on the last case is that the space here also needs to be demolished before. So that is why there is a difference. And then as it relates to the cost to put a tenant in place, we have found that the majority of our landlords are not breaking even on their leases until almost 5 years after the lease has started. So the tenant build out, leasing commissions, et cetera. I mean, the office business is a very bad business to be in right now. And the cost is what the cost is, and people are not going cash flow positive until after 5 years on average. The final point I just want to make relates to the 2 years of lost rent. The fact is, the county assesses every year, and a landlord or a potential purchaser is not going to assume the space is going to lease up in 1 year, when in fact we have over 24 months on average time on market, and we have negative absorption. The county assesses every year, and if the situation changes, it can be addressed next year. But at this point, 2 years in lost rent should be deducted from the capitalized value. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county.
Yes, thank you. This property, we somewhat mirror all the rental income in our test column with respect to the pro forma that the appellant is suggesting as well. It does come down to expenses and TIs. When we look at the expenses overall in the county, on the average, my guidelines suggest, and the INEs that were submitted suggest on average it's about $9 a square foot across all areas. And $9 is what we used here in this test column F. When we're looking at this property, I believe the appellant has suggested that they will incur demo costs for the spaces, but they have not yet. The difference between this property and the last property, that last property was in shell condition. We can't determine exactly what the new tenant may or may not want with respect to that space. In looking at the reports that I received before making the guidelines for office, we do see that there are some cases where $70 a square foot is appropriate. I believe the case that was supposed to be heard today was $70 a square foot, and that gives the understanding that that is accepted on some leases as well. And that doesn't mean that all leases will receive $110 per square foot like the appellant suggests. So I asked the board to take that in consideration. And given our test, we do ask that the board confirm the original assessment at $58,165,400. Chris, did you have anything to add?
I'll wait for the 1 minute wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
I guess for the county, on the cap rate's different between this one and the last building, which is right next door. Is that based on effective age or distance to metro, or just curious?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, it should be based on effective age. 6.8. Just give me a second to look that up.
And I guess if it is effective age, if you've toured these properties, you've been in the lobby or whatever, is there anything fundamentally different between the two buildings? Like, one has high ceilings and the other one is built in the 80s or something like that? Or are they, from a leasing perspective, are they pretty similar?
Just to your first part, Mr. Hoffman, that there are determinant factors such as the effective age will be primary, but it's also going to be metro adjacent, and then of course whether or not they're in a bid.
All right, but I mean, they're next door, the two properties.
Yeah, I can't speak to the inspection. I'm just as far as how the cap rates would be configured. Yeah, they're part of the guideline, but they should be based upon either, again, effective age and then proximity to metro and or if they're in the bid.
Okay.
It looks like this may have just been rounded. It looks like it should have been, if I'm reading this correct, 6895, 6795, and I think it was just rounded up to 6.8.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Mr. Venerando?
Yeah, I have one for Mr. Peralta. At what point would the county consider the TIs at a higher rate on a building like this?
Well, basically, because the other properties are assessed the same way, meaning looking at the reports of the market analysis, we found that with the properties that are rented out less than $45 a square foot, $70 was appropriate. For the properties that are renting at a higher rate, they would attribute $110 a square foot for the TIs. You know, the market analysis and the reports that I review before doing the guidelines kind of dictates that, if you will, unless in the INEs they're reported as such with each lease. We ask that information on the rent rolls to see if we can decipher if there should be an adjustment based on, you know, the INEs that we received in the prior year. So based on what we found and what we reviewed and analyzed, $70 was appropriate.
So it's pretty much based on the rental rate.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Can
Mr.
I address
Maskin, do you
that
have-
very briefly? Could I
Sure.
address that briefly? So the guidelines have $70 per square foot, but that is for space that is not necessarily needing to be gutted. So this space is like new space because this space needs to be gutted before it can be released. So the guidelines do provide for a much higher rate than the $70 per square foot on new space without a consideration of the rent that's being achieved at the property. Also, just like to point out that the guidelines for a number of years have had that same break point in terms of rent. And we're not in the same market that we were pre-2020. So the fact that those guidelines have not changed is probably not correct. But in this case, again, I think we can rely on the new space guidelines because that's what we're looking at is we're going to be building out from shell.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Maskin, do you have questions?
No, I have some comments later. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Nobody else. All right then.
Oh,
Mr.
excuse me, Mary. I do have a question that I missed very quick. For the appellant, you had mentioned that you saw some data that these days it takes about 5 years on average for break even on leases after all the expenses it takes to accommodate a tenant. I would very much love to see that data, wherever you got that information from. You know how to find it. Thank you.
That is from, I'd be happy to share that with you in private, not online, but that data is from an analysis of actual leases that have taken place. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. And again, we would be happy to share that with you in private, but not in a public forum.
Okay.
And if you need to redact names or something, that'd just be fine. I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Sure. I'd love to see that information as well in private. In looking at this property, we would suggest, based on our test, that the county, the board, kind of confirm this case based on the information that we provided. Again, the expenses across the board in the county are at $9 a square foot. We do think that $70 is appropriate because it is equitable amongst all the other properties that have been assessed for 2022 at $70 a square foot for TIs for properties with excess vacancy. We ask that the board consider that just based on based on equalization. No other property is afforded that given the excess vacancy, whether it is in shell condition or not. Given the information that could suggest that it should be higher, I'd be more than happy to analyze that information and make adjustments for next year. Thank you. Anything else, Chris?
No, I think Rob summed it up well. Again, if you were to look at any deviation as far as operating expenses, you can see that column D and column G are virtually aligned, just for the exception of a 1-year rent loss allowance. Our rent loss is actually higher at $41 a square foot in column D, but it's 1 year, it's an annual assessment. It's appropriate to look at each year. We do believe that the column F confirms our original assessment, but again, keep that in mind if you're looking at adjustments for operating expenses. We've already looked at them in column D. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So column D does have $10 per square foot in operating expenses. This is dropped to $9 per square foot in column F with the DREA's test. So if we apply the $10 per square foot to bring that number down, that is supported by both the actual operating history of this property. It's supported by similar properties in the same neighborhood as well. I'd like to also direct your all's attention, if you have the office guidelines available from the Arlington County guidelines. This is on page 29 of the guidelines. You'll see that the TIs are outlined here. It says tenant improvements is $70 for renewal leases less than $45. And $115 for new buildings or buildings with renewal leases above $45 per square foot. This property's vacant space is built out for prior tenants. It's not in usable condition. If a tenant were to accept it as is, they would not be paying market rents for their rental rates. So $70 again is for renewal leases. These are going to be new leases. It's going to need to be demoed and built out again, which is more akin to a new building. The guidelines show $115 for that. We're only asking for $110. And as of the date of value, those demo costs have yet to be incurred. Again, the data supports a greater lease up period as well. And we ask that the value be reduced as outlined on the appeal. And Eileen, do you have anything you'd like to add? You're muted, Eileen.
The space is in the process of being demoed, so it's not speculative. As Jordan said, the space is not suitable for occupancy. And just like to re-emphasize the 2 years, any potential purchaser is not going to assume that the property is going to lease up in 1 year and that they're going to look at actual market conditions. The county assesses every year, so if the market changes and all of a sudden office demand is high, then go back to 1 year. But at this point, 2 years is certainly appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. Where is everybody on this? Mr. Yates?
Well, I concur with the county's point as far as the lease up period being 1 year. We'll look at it again. I understand that. I think that's probably correct. I commend the appellant in looking at the the regs on what we're doing here with the 110, or as he said, 115 for new space over that price. I did not pick that up, but I agree that you cannot, and I've just been through this with a project. You cannot do that at $70. It's not possible. So I put that out there. And as far as Ken, as far as what it takes to recoup that money, or how long tenant or management's going to rent a property for, that's a decision they're going to make going forward. But the cost is the cost of doing the work. Anyway.
Okay. All right, other folks?
Yeah,
Mr. Hoffman?
Comment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hoffman?
And similar to the last building, I think it needs to come down a little bit, and they should probably be, for the sake of equity, I don't see a huge difference between the two buildings other than this subject has a little higher vacancy, but it also has the Glebe Road frontage, which gives it much better ground floor retail. They've got the bank in there, they've got a FedEx, Kinko's that are, so I think it kind of balances out, so they should probably be in the same neighborhood.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin?
Okay, thank you. On that, I mean, I'm just looking at the I&Es. They have 12 years difference in effective age, and that goes into a different decade, and therefore a different. See, I don't have it in front of me, the guidelines, but I'm betting that that's why the cap rates are different, because they're different decades. Second, probably a good idea for the county to consider these TIs for a brand new building versus an additional lease in terms of building costs are skyrocketing. I'm talking for next year, of course. Also in that regard, it could easily be that tenants are gaining the leverage over landlords for the near term because of virtual office space and COVID and Lord knows what. And perhaps the tenants are going to start to get during this year, 2022, and next year and foreseeable future, better deals with too many office buildings. So, I mean, that dynamic ought to change, I bet. I'm not going to get into this 1 year, 2 year lease up. I see it as double counting if you don't keep it at 1 year. Another one is that going back, I keep hearing from the appellant that no, these spaces have to be demoed. They're not usable. I mean, was there motorcycle maintenance on the 6th floor of this building? That's very qualitative. It's an intelligent business, a common business decision by the landlord to start all over again. But I've never been in a place that had to be gutted to just cement floors, ceilings, and walls. It's prudent, but it's not required. Finally, I want to echo what Mr. Peralta said about, well, we don't know what the build-out's going to be. What if it's a full open plan? When it's a call center, versus a law firm that needs lots of mahogany and glass walls and kitchenettes and all kinds of great stuff. I mean, we're doing mass appraisal here. And as I said at the beginning, maybe 70 is starting to be too low now, and we should maybe see something higher last year, but we're in this year. So that just doesn't count. And finally, I've already asked about the 5 year. I mean, I just can't imagine landlords are now waiting 5 years to break even, given that leases are shrinking in length and a lot of leases are less than 5 years. I may have something else, but that's enough for my time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Penaranda, did you have your hand up earlier?
No, I was just going to make a comment as far as I think, to be consistent, I thought that increasing the expenses would be the proper way to do it in this case also. I also tested based on just increasing the TIs instead of the expenses, because in the previous case, like I mentioned, if we're going to do one, I think the other one should stay, the other portion should stay. So they both come up with almost the same, very close value. If we increase the expenses, I come up with a number of 56,420,200. And if we increase the TIs to 110 and not the expenses, it comes up to 56,239,900. A little bit lower, but I would be okay by just increasing the expenses as we did the previous case.
Okay, I would tend to agree with you on that. What did you increase the expenses to?
$10.
Okay. What's everybody think about that? I can live with that. Okay, Mr. Hoffman's good, Mr. Lawson's good.
I'm good, Ken.
Okay. All right, Mr.
Uh,
Penrod, if you want to,
And in this one, there's no storage, so the square footage will be the same, the total. 420,200 based on increasing the expenses to $10.
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
The amount will be 56,420,200 based on increasing the expenses to $10 a square foot.
Okay.
okay, I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed?
Ken, I.
Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment's reduced to 56,420,200 based on increasing expenses to $10 a square foot. Okay, and the last case on the agenda is RPC 1800541, 2300 Clarendon Boulevard. Mr. Herman, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. 2300 Clarendon Boulevard. This is a 274,000 square foot property in the courthouse neighborhood. This was built in 1990. The issues on appeal for this property are the occupied and vacant office rental rates, the pass-through income, and the operating expense rate. The DREA test is on page 4 of the appeal, and the appellant's pro forma is on page 50. Now, before I get into the actual and stabilized figures, I'd like to address a couple of items on the DREA test page. First, you'll notice that there's a new column that we haven't seen on prior cases included. This is column E2, and it's titled DREA Reconstructed. This column is not the result of generally accepted appraisal practice and is a case study in just picking and choosing data points in search of a final value. Column E2 is an amalgamation consisting of the actual 2021 reported figures, 2018 figures, appellant pro forma figures, and county guideline rates. This approach contains several errors. Primarily, this reconstructed column double counts income on space that vacated during 2021, and the reconstructed column also does not include concessions on occupied space or actual concessions. As such, this column should not be considered in the evaluation of this property. Also on this page, please note that column G has a note that it's revised on the appellant pro forma. This is due to us increasing the occupied square footage by 3,755 square feet due to a new lease at the property. This revised value is just under $350,000 higher than we initially appealed at. Now, importantly, looking at this DREA test page, you'll notice that NOI at the property has decreased each year since 2019. The NOI has dropped by over 14% during this time period. Now, on the rental rate, one of the tenants at this property, they had their lease expire in 2021. This tenant then signed a new lease on a higher floor for just under 8 years of a term. The face rent on the new lease was $40.25 per square foot and has a 93-month term with 9 months free rent. This is 9.7% free rent on this new lease. It's important to note that this new lease base rent is also over 11% less than the in-place leases. Clearly, the market rate for this property has decreased since the onset of the pandemic. If we discount the base rent on this new lease by the free rent that is included as part of the lease, the 9.7% free rent, we arrive at a net effective rental rate of $36.35 per square foot. This is the value that we have applied to the vacant office space as indicative of the market rate as of the date of value. If we apply the same 9.7% as market concessions, if we apply this to the in-place leases, which have a weighted average rental rate of $45.50 per square foot, the resulting net effective rental rate, base rent discounted for those concessions, is $41.09 per square foot for the occupied office. Next, note the pass-through income assessed at this property is $85,000. Compare this to the actual prior year 2021 pass-through income, which was negative $77,000. Now, this came up in the first case that we heard, and this is an issue because, as in that case, the county adopted the actual prior year pass-through income. In this case, they did not. They're overstating pass-through income in a non-uniform manner with other office properties in the county. For other properties, as we saw earlier, the pass-through income from the prior year is used in the county test column. We do not dispute this methodology, yet on this property, the assessment does not use the prior year pass-through income, which results in a non-uniform assessment. This approach is also not uniform with the way this property has been assessed for the prior 3 years, when the county applied the prior year pass-through income on the revised assessments for 2019, 2020, and 2021. For some reason, this year, the assessment decided to change course and apply a non-uniform methodology to the pass-through income, which results in a non-equalized assessment. Here again, we see the issue of operating expenses being inadequately accounted for. This property has been relatively stabilized over the past 4 years. During this 4-year period, operating expenses averaged $9.59 per square foot. This is the average rate over 4 years, even with physical occupancy being very low due to work from home policies in place over the course of 2020 and 2021. The last year physical occupancy was unaffected by the pandemic was 2019. You can see on the test page, operating expenses in that year were $9.96 per square foot. This supports our claim value of operating expenses at $10 per square foot at this property. To summarize, the most recent leasing activity at the property required nearly 10% in concessions and resulted in a net effective rental rate of $36.35 per square foot. If we apply this same concession rate to in-place leases, we come up with a weighted average rental rate of $41.09 per square foot. Next, the assessment overstates pass-through income by ignoring the actual 2021 pass-through income, which is not uniform with other properties in the county, as we have seen on prior cases today. The assessment fails to adequately account for operating expenses at the property. These costs have increased due to inflation, and they're understated in 2020 and 2021 due to lower physical occupancy at the property. Again, 2019 operating expenses were $10 a square foot. Finally, the actual NOI at the property has, again, it's decreased from 2019 to 2021 by over 14%. Thank you. And Eileen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, Jordan, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this case, what you'll see in column E2, I'd like to speak to that. In previous cases, I've alluded to exactly what I demonstrated here. It's in response to what I've been receiving in the INEs. So the INEs that are reported in these cases today that you heard before the board, they're only reporting the actual income. And so in order to give the board a better indication of what this property should achieve based on the gross potential income, the county, myself, has illustrated that in column E2, whereas when we're looking at the actual income reported, I'm just copying every line item from the operating year 2021 to in column E to column E2. And what I've done is also included the agent's estimate of value. I don't agree with that estimate of value, but as a point of reference, we're looking at the one bullet point there of the $2,574,998, which is the agent's estimate for the vacant space on the property. As you compare E2 to column F, what you'll see is the county does address some of the concessions that the appellant has noted, and they're saying they're double counting. We're double counting the income with a tenant that previously has left the property. But in all actuality, we have a delta of $534,857 between what they actually reported and what DREA's test column F is actually showing as the gross potential for the property. This just gives you an idea. If you look down on row 7 for gross potential income, you see that they're reporting column E 9.4 million, in gross potential, but that isn't accurate if you include the, again, the vacant space. So by illustrating in column E2, we find that that figure is closer to 12 million based upon the actual information, actual income provided and the agent's estimate. But then you'll see that in column F, DREA's gross potential income is lower than that number, again, based on the concessions that the county took in consideration and the rents that are in place and what we perceive the rents are going to be for the vacant space of 70,839 square feet. If you look at line 5, we'll address the stabilized pass-through income. The appellant in their column G reported a negative 77,000 for the potential gross of this property. To, just looking at that figure alone, and I've done this on other cases because I've seen this and addressed this, that number is a net number that they're reporting. And so that's not the actual income they receive. It's more of a net number. And I believe that concessions or whatever rent loss or vacancy should be shown at lines 8 through 10 as more of a concession or a reimbursement, so to speak. So that the way it was reported led me to that 85,000 figure where I just took, the 4 years, the negative $77,000 into consideration and came up with that stabilized 85,000 pass-through income. Property, if it were to lease up the 70,839 square feet of vacant space, you would assume that once stabilized, it would accrue, pass-through income of greater than 85,000 per year. And you'll see in the history of this property in 2019 and 2020 in particular, they grossed 236,557 in 2019 and 177,944 in 2020. And now to see a negative number, I just didn't think it was appropriate when estimating the potential gross of this property. Now, this property has similar vacancy as the last property or the last two properties. This property is pretty stabilized as far as expenses are concerned. We're at $9.75, and we do afford some vacancy allowance below the line based on the square footage that we saw as of the date of value. With that, I believe Chris has something to mention.
I just wanted to reiterate, I think it's something the appellant mentioned twice actually in regards to the column G, which is essentially taking the newest leases that they had, discounting for concessions, and then applying, if I recall correctly, applying that 9% discount to leases that are already in place, which is how they came up with a $41.09 per square foot average. I'm not sure why that would take place, given that these are leases that are in place. These are already structured. Typically, leases are going to increase 2 or 3% a year. So they actually applied a negative depressive mark, if you will, to get down to $41.09 a square foot, which is why their office number is quite a bit lower than what was achieved in the operating year 2021, as seen in column E. In regards to the column E2, this may be uncommon for office properties, but I know you've seen reconstructions on the apartment side, on the GenCom side. This is very standard fare. When we're looking at a operating expense statement, INE, et cetera, we obviously can take that time to look at it from our own perspective, look at it in regards to stabilizing the property. That's essentially what the column F is as well. And then lastly, I point out, kind of harping on what Rob pointed out, is that the appellants took the time to stabilize, in their own words, the income levels for office, for vacant office, for retail, et cetera. But then they used the actual reporting for parking, for storage, and for pass-throughs. As Mr. Peralta pointed out, if this is going to be a stabilized property and looking at gross potential, those should be grossed out. In regards to potential, even if the parking may be lower than it was last year, the idea that it's going to be to the cent what they incurred last year is not necessarily believable. Given that we did go through the numbers in the test column F, We do believe that in this case, actually operating expenses are much more in line with what's been reported historically. We do believe that the revision offered at $91,045,052 is appropriate, and we ask the board to confirm that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, this is for the county. I'm totally confused, and I apologize. Over the tenant improvements, how much vacant space is there?
70,839. There's a breakdown on our page 5 of 82.
Why, on your test, why is the below the line TI figure 104,000?
$70 times 1,497 square feet.
Times, you multiply 70 times what?
1,497 square feet.
Okay, and why
Would-
are you using that figure versus 70,839?
It's
That's what
the
I don't get.
It's the residual of, we allocate 25% below, before capitalization. So the figure that you see for our
It's
vacancy.
above 25. Okay.
Correct. All right.
If you see the chart on page 5, Mr. Lawson, you'll see that breakdown.
Yeah, I tried. I couldn't understand it. I apologize.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, again, we stabilized the income as Mr. Chikas has pointed out in our test column. We've looked at the history of this property, and we believe that the test column is more accurate depiction of, what we can value this property for. Originally, we had the assessment slightly higher, but we believe that the assessment based on the expenses, based on the market rent, and the vacancy of the property, we believe the value should be $91,045,100, I believe, for this property. We asked the board to take that in consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So leased office, vacant office, we have recent leasing activity at this property that is indicative of what the market rate is for this property. The new lease in 2021 came in at a net effective rental rate of $36.35. Apply that to the in-place leases, we get to $41.09. Those are indicative of where the current market is for this property. The most recent leases are most indicative of that. Pass-through income is not treated uniformly with other properties in the county. We saw this during the discussion of 4401 Fairfax just earlier today. We brought it up on appeal. The county made the adjustment in the test column on that property. Here, they have not done that. They've not treated this property uniformly with other properties in the county. And as such, that figure should be reduced to the 2021 rate. Operating expenses, again, this is the RB corridor, this is courthouse. Operating history at the property supports a rate greater than what the county has used. As such, we believe the assessment should be reduced as noted in the appeal. And Eileen, would you like to add anything?
I just want to point out as Mr. Harmon said, the rent on the new lease was $36.35. And that information has been provided, and in column F, the county uses $39 per square foot on vacant space, which results in a substantial overstatement of the potential income at the property. And again, just because I think it's a little confusing,
Okay, I gotta have you wrap it up because you're over your minute now.
That's fine. I think I've covered it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among board members now. Where is everybody on this?
This is Ken.
Okay, Mr. Metzgen.
Okay, thank you. On the pass-throughs, a negative pass-through, if this were journaled correctly, means that tenants are getting rebates from the landlord. And I think but indeed it was another kind of concession, and Mr. Peralta accounted for that. So if there is some bait and switch between 2 cases ago and this one, that the in accounting for pass-throughs that the appellant alleges, I'm not seeing it. It seems it just shows up elsewhere as a different line item, but it's in the same column. So I'm satisfied with that. I'm not satisfied that, although I certainly believe that the last large tenant moving upstairs is booking effectively at a much lower a rate than what we had experienced over time. That attests that perhaps, again, the power is switching to tenants, but we don't know who this one tenant is, how very strong the tenant is, although I'm betting that it is. And maybe this rent rates will start to change, but we can't do it with one tenant in 1 year. We need to have a trend like we do for so many decisions that this board makes. And finally, on the operating expenses, at first I just thought, well, this is too close, 975, 995. Well, I don't know, either could be right. But again, since as the department pointed out, there's a below the line adjustment that it kind of, in a way, effectively increases the operating expenses. I'm good with what they've done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other folks? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I tinkered around with different things and looks to me like the test is appropriate.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm okay with the revised assessment. I think it's more in line. Even the NOI is lower than anything else that they've had in previous years. So I'm okay with that.
I agree.
All right, I'm the holdout here. I think it's still a little high, but if the majority of the folks go that way, I'm good with that. So would somebody like to make a motion then?
I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to $91,045,100.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. A motion, a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor?
All right.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So it's 5-1. I'm opposed. The assessments reduced to the county's revised number of $91,045,100.
Thank you, board. If I could, I don't believe there's ever been an instance where, and maybe there's been one where I have misrepresented or we have misrepresented to the board what an item is. And I can tell you that the concessions were not included in the pass-through income. That was the actual pass-through income. And it is very troubling to have to defend the numbers that we have on submitted and that our clients have sworn to or certified on the income and expense survey form. So I would just like to note that, and that 77,000 is in fact a rebate to the client and has nothing to do with the $700,000 or so reported in column E that reflected actual concessions. So if there ever is a question about whether there is something actually reported, I would greatly appreciate it if you could ask about it during questions so that we have a chance to address it. Thank you.
Okay, duly noted. Okay, that completes the agenda, excuse me, for today. Is there any other business for the county? No? Okay, then we will stand adjourned. I'll ask the members to stay on just about scheduling. But we will adjourn here at 10:55 and re-adjourn next Tuesday, August 30th at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Board.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.